Have you ever encountered an idea so strange, so unsettling, that it made you pause not just for a moment, but deeply enough to question everything you thought you understood about reality? Not confusion in the ordinary sense, but a kind of mental disruption that shakes the very structure of how you think. Something that doesn't just challenge your knowledge, but challenges the way knowledge itself works. Today, we're diving into a paradox, a concept so powerful that once you truly grasp it, your perception of truth, logic, and even your own existence may never be the same again. This is not just a clever trick or a philosophical game. This is the paradox that breaks logic. And once it clicks in your mind, you will begin to see cracks in places you once thought were unbreakable. Let's begin with something deceptively simple. As human beings, we rely heavily on logic. Logic is our compass. It helps us distinguish between what makes sense and what doesn't. It allows us to build arguments, solve problems, and create systems that function reliably. From mathematics to science to everyday decision-making, logic feels like the most trustworthy tool we have. It feels stable, predictable, almost absolute. But what if that sense of stability is an illusion? What if logic, the very thing we trust to guide us, has boundaries, and beyond those boundaries, it begins to collapse? Consider this famous statement: "This sentence is false." First, it seems trivial, almost like a joke. But the moment you try to evaluate whether it's true or false, you fall into a loop. If the sentence is true, then what it says must be correct, which means it is false. But if it's false, then it must actually be true. You are stuck. There is no consistent answer. Logic, in this case, doesn't resolve the problem, it creates it. This is known as a paradox, and it reveals something unsettling. Even within a logical system, contradictions can arise that cannot be solved using the rules of that system. Now you might be tempted to dismiss this as a linguistic trick, something that exists only because of how language is structured. But the deeper you explore, the more you realize that paradoxes are not limited to words. They appear in reality, in consciousness, and even in the way you understand yourself. Let's turn inward for a moment. Who are you? Sounds like a simple question, but the moment you try to answer it, things begin to unravel. You might say, "I am my thoughts." But if you can observe your thoughts, if you can notice them, question them, even disagree with them, then how can you be them? The observer and the observed cannot be the same thing. So maybe you are the observer. It's the awareness behind the thoughts. But then ask yourself, can you observe that awareness? And if you can, then who is doing the observing now? Each answer leads to another layer, another perspective, another observer. It becomes an infinite regress, a loop with no clear starting point or end. This is the paradox of self-awareness. You are both the subject and the object, the thinker and the thought, the one asking the question and the one trying to answer it. And this duality breaks the way logic typically works, because logic depends on clear distinctions, this or that, true or false, subject or object. But here, those distinctions blur and collapse into each other. Now let's expand this even further. Imagine you are searching for absolute truth, something undeniable, something that cannot be questioned. You might turn to science, which is built on observation, experimentation, and evidence. But science itself relies on assumptions, that the universe is consistent, that cause and effect exist, that our senses and instruments can accurately measure reality. These assumptions cannot be proven without already trusting the system they belong to. It's circular. Philosophy faces a similar issue. It uses reasoning to explore truth, but reasoning itself must be trusted before it can be used. And logic, the foundation of both science and philosophy, relies on rules that cannot be proven without using logic again. This creates a loop, a self-referential system that cannot fully justify itself from within. This is known as the paradox of foundations. Every system of thought is built on something that cannot be completely proven using that system. At some point, you have to accept a starting point without proof. And once you realize that, the idea of absolute certainty begins to weaken. Not because everything is false, but because everything rests on something unproven. Now, let's bring this back to your everyday life. You believe you make choices. You believe you have control over your actions. But let's examine that belief more closely. When you make a decision, it is based on your desires, your preferences, your thoughts, and your emotions. But where did those come from? Did you choose them? Did you decide what you like, what you fear, what you value? Or did those arise from your genetics, your upbringing, your experiences, factors you did not fully control? This leads us to the paradox of free will. If your choices are determined by prior causes, then in what sense are they truly free? But if your choices are completely random, then they are not really yours either. So you are caught between determinism and randomness, neither of which fully captures what it feels like to make a choice. Once again, logic struggles to give a satisfying answer, and this is where the discomfort begins, because paradoxes don't give you closure. They don't resolve neatly. They leave you in a state of tension, where multiple possibilities exist at once, and none of them fully explain the situation. Your mind wants resolution. It wants clarity. But paradox forces you to sit with uncertainty. But what if that uncertainty is not a weakness? What if it is actually a doorway? A doorway to a deeper level of thinking. A level where you are no longer confined to rigid categories. Where you can hold multiple perspectives at once without needing to force a single conclusion. Because the truth is, reality may not be as simple as our logical systems try to make it. It may be layered, complex, and sometimes even contradictory. Think about the biggest breakthroughs in human history. They didn't come from blindly following existing logic. They came from questioning it. From challenging assumptions, from exploring ideas that initially seemed impossible or irrational. Progress begins at the edge of understanding, where certainty starts to break down. So what does this mean for you? It means you don't have to fear not knowing. You don't have to rush to find answers just to feel comfortable. Instead, you can embrace the mystery. You can allow yourself to question deeply, to explore ideas without immediately judging them, to sit with contradictions without needing to resolve them instantly. Because sometimes the goal is not to eliminate paradox, but to understand what it reveals. It reveals that your mind has limits. Your systems of thinking, as powerful as they are, cannot capture everything. And that realization, instead of making you weaker, actually makes you more aware, more open, more capable of growth. So the next time you encounter an idea that doesn't make sense, don't dismiss it too quickly. Don't force it into a familiar framework. Let it challenge you. Let it stretch your thinking. Because in that stretch, something powerful happens. You begin to see beyond the surface. The paradox that breaks logic is not just a puzzle to solve. It is an experience to go through. A shift in perception. A moment where the mind realizes its own limits, and in doing so, expands beyond them. And maybe that's the real paradox. That by accepting you cannot fully understand everything, you begin to understand more than ever before.